Hey, it's Guy Raz here, and welcome to The Great Creators, a place where I have conversations with some of the greatest artists, performers, and musicians of our time. And my guest today, Sam Harris of the band X-Ambassadors. X-Ambassadors' music has literally been streamed billions of times, and Sam has written for people like Lizzo and Rihanna. He's had an incredible career, but as you'll hear today, it didn't always look like it would work out. Like that time Sam was so desperate to book a gig, he actually created a fictional email address and posed as his own manager. So today on the show, how X-Ambassadors broke through after years of rejection. Enjoy this conversation with Sam Harris of X-Ambassadors. Okay, well, let's begin.
Sam, I'm so excited to talk to you, man.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Me too.
I've been listening to the TED Radio Hour for a very long time, so your voice is just like a warm comfort blanket on my soul.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. Thank you for saying that. It was a great. I haven't been the host of that show since 2019. I hung up my hat on that show just because I do too many other ones. But
I know, and I've listened to How I Built This, and I just started listening to a bunch of episodes of this podcast too.
Oh, thank you so much.
My imposter syndrome is through the roof. You have talked to some insane people on this show.
Well, I mean, my imposter syndrome is just permanent fixture of my day-to-day life. So I just I just kind of roll through life and hopefully nobody figures it out as I managed to pull the wool over people's eyes.
Somehow we've both done it. I don't know.
Yeah. Let's go back to growing up. I know you guys were. How old were you when you guys moved to Ithaca?
I was 3.
3, 4?
Yeah,
3,
I was 3, turning 4. My brother was 4 or 5 at the time. So we were babies. So I spent most of my childhood in upstate New York, in Ithaca.
And it was just you and your brother Casey, no other siblings?
Just me and Case, yeah. And our little family unit, my mom, my brother and I, my dad, we're very tight. We're very tight, and I think a lot of that probably has to do with just the way that you operate in a family where, just cards on the table. One of the members of the family has a disability.
Yeah.
My brother being blind, I think. It forced us to be a very tight kind of unit, especially him and me and my mom. My dad was away a lot working, so.
Your dad, I think, was he was a publicist,
a film publicist, unit publicist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how did you end up in Ithaca? Why did they move there? Because it's not right. It's not even. It's a small college town.
Yeah. My mom is from upstate New York. My grandfather worked at the Kodak building in Rochester, and she was born in. She was born in Rochester. They moved around. They were in Jersey for a minute. They were in Pittsford for a minute, and they ended up settling near Rochester. So my mom's side of the family had roots there. My aunt actually lived right next door to the house that we grew up in Ithaca. So her and her husband owned this house way out in the sticks, like maybe about just outside the county line of Ithaca, or the city line of Ithaca. And they happen to have some extra land, and they gifted my parents this land, and my parents were able to build a house on this property, and that's where we grew up, out in the middle of the woods.
And you mentioned your brother Casey, and people who are fans of the band know that he's blind and was born blind. What did that? I mean, you mentioned that kind of brought the family closer together. I imagine because, first of all, you guys are just 2 years apart. He's your older brother.
Yeah.
But I imagine that there was also a bond between the two of you as kids, just because, you wanted to always make sure that he was safe.
Yeah, yeah, very much so. I pretty quickly turned into like my mom's helper, and I was always helping Casey too. But in addition to that, I wanted to show her that, my brother, in addition to being blind, was like a very rebellious, stubborn kid. So you have those two things, and that's like a recipe for a parent being driven absolutely insane, 24/7. So I quickly took on this more of an adult kind of persona as a kid. I wanted to show my mom that I was responsible, that I had everything together, and that I could help take care of her and my brother and the house and myself all at once. So yeah, I was a pretty stressed out kid, I think.
Yeah.
But also look, my parents were so loving and so attentive to me. My mom, I don't know how she did it, with the amount of attention and time that she did have to spend on my brother. She was still able to make me feel safe and secure, which I think is the biggest thing in the world. But definitely, like, I pretty quickly started to understand that my brother needed help. And I think, as like a little kid, you have an opportunity, especially a younger brother, you have an opportunity to do something for your older sibling. It's like the greatest gift in the world. So I was so game for it.
Yeah.
But, it's also obviously, it's a heavy thing. It can be.
Tell me about music. Were you and Casey? You're only 2 years apart, so you were already. You were 2 grades behind him, probably. So you had similar. I think about my own kids who are also 2 years apart. You had similar, probably, influences. Were both of you attracted to music and playing instruments from an early age?
Yes, but it's so funny. My brother and I had completely different tastes growing up. We also just to backtrack a little bit. I as I was saying, how I kind of happily took on this role of almost like a second caretaker.
Yeah.
My brother and I really did not get along for a long time. As kids, we just were constantly butting heads. I think it kind of like it was pretty great when we were young, and then like the older we got, closer to middle school, it got stickier and stickier when I started kind of like spreading my wings a little bit and making new friends and being out in the world, and honestly doing a lot of things that my brother didn't. He either wasn't able to do or didn't feel like he could do, and I think there's some resentment that built there. So by the time we started, like right before we started playing music together, we were pretty far apart. I had my group of friends. I had my taste in music. I was really into, I was into like a lot of like alternative rock and hip hop stuff, and honestly a lot of pop music, a lot of stuff that I would hear on the radio or see on MTV or see on BET or VH1. And my brother listened to a lot of acid jazz and like instrumental music, and he was really big on like Chick Corea. And I was like obsessed with the Red Hot Chili Peppers. If that gives you any indication of like where our heads were at. But the thing was, the whole time, my mom is a singer. My mom was, when my parents met, she had been doing this for many years. She was kind of a cabaret lounge singer. She would sing in bars and in clubs and did that for years and years and years. Still does every once in a while. So we grew up with music in the house. I was always singing. My brother started playing piano when he was 8 and really took to it for a couple of reasons. Just I think he really genuinely loved music. Also, the piano specifically, with my brother's visual impairment, the high contrast of the keys was really easy for him to see. So what little vision that he has, he's still, and had at the time, he was able to see that instrument pretty clearly. So we had it around.
Tell me about how you guys first formed a band, because I think you did this in high school, right?
Yeah.
The Fuzz Brothers.
Yeah, the Fuzz Brothers. Wow, you did your homework, man. Um, yeah, my brother and I, around when my parents got divorced when I was 15 and my brother was 16, 17, just about to leave the house. And I had been in a band for, I think 3 or 4 years up until that point with a buddy of mine who ended up actually being one of the founding members of Ex Ambassadors, Noah Feldshuh. And he and I had been playing music for a while. This thing happened in my family that I think,
Divorce.
yes,
Folks divorce.
a pretty monumental thing, especially for like a teenager. I was pretty rocked by it, and I think maybe a combination of that and just a little bit of like my brother was leaving the house soon. He was going to move away to become a piano tuner and technician. He went to the school for blind piano tuners in
Wow.
Washington State. I know, it's a very small school, and learned how to repair and tune uprights and grands and baby grands. And he was about to leave. This thing had happened that had torn my family apart. And then he was always just like in the basement with us, hanging around and like jamming. And I'd have to always be like, Casey, we gotta rehearse now. Can you just leave us alone? I so resisted him being in my band for so long because it was my thing. And again,
Right.
when you grow up the way that we did, so much of my life and so much of my time was tied up with him, and I think so much of my identity was also tied up with my brother. And I was like, this is my territory over here. You can't come in. And it took my bandmates being like, yo, your brother is so good. Why can't he play with us?
Yeah.
For me to finally cave, and haven't turned back since.
Were you always the singer?
Oh yeah, I was always a singer. It was I was an actor before. I started acting and singing around the same time.
High school plays and things like
Oh
that?
yeah, musical theater. I was a musical theater kid, like through and through. And so I desperately wanted to be the center of attention, and there would be no other role for me in a band.
So when you guys formed a band in high school, I mean, did you guys perform? I mean, you're in Ithaca, so it's a small town.
Yeah.
Did you get a chance to go out and play gigs?
We tried as much as we could. There were a couple places, like there was an internet cafe called WowNet that let us play. They put on all ages shows there, and they put on all ages shows at this place called the Lost Dog Cafe, neither of which exist anymore. And there were a couple other, there was this place called the Rongovian Embassy out in Trumansburg that every once in a while would have underage shows, but it was few and far between. We mostly just played in our basement, and there were a couple times where we'd be able to, play at house parties or illegal venues. But
Yeah.
for the most part, I think we did a show in our middle school cafeteria one night. But yeah.
I know that you went to New York City in 2006 to study at the New School for college, and I know eventually your brother also moved in with you to New York. When you went to college, right? And because this is around the time when you will meet your future bandmates. I mean, Noah Feldshuh you knew, but then you would meet
Adam. Yeah.
Adam Levin. Did you go to college knowing what you would be as a grown-up, or what you might do? Did you have an idea? Because you were going there, and I don't know, maybe did you study, like philosophy or sociology? What was your?
It's funny. I went there to try. I was actively seeking out a well-rounded education. Right. I knew, because I loved doing theater. I loved acting. I got accepted into a couple great acting conservatory programs, and I was scared of not having time to do music. And also afraid that I would just end up only doing one thing and become this kind of single-minded. I knew for myself that I needed to feel like I had a greater sense of the world. So I chose a liberal arts route and then ended up just like only doing theater while I was there. So it totally backfired. Yeah, I mean, going out there, I had such a clear plan in my head. And this is, I mean, it just kind of paints a picture of my neuroses. I was like, I'm going to move to New York. My best friend, Noah, was in my band. Didn't really have any other prospects other than the band. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna take him with me to New York. And I'm gonna take my brother to New York. And we're all gonna live together. And I'm gonna put this whole thing on my back. And we're gonna be in a band. And we're gonna make it happen. And so and somehow we did it. But I think that looking back on it, I'm like, I have a lot of sympathy for that kid. I'm like, man, you know, I wish that I had not put so much pressure on myself. But then again, you know, I don't know if I would be where I am now if I hadn't.
So it was not clear. I mean, you didn't necessarily have a dream or vision initially that you would be in a band or like a successful band.
Oh, absolutely, I did. 100%.
You did, okay.
Yes, 1,000%. I knew that I wanted to be the lead singer of a band. I also loved being on stage. I loved acting, but I don't know. I think one of the reasons why I think in retrospect music superseded that was because I got to do it with my brother, my family, and I think that was such an important thing to me. I also felt like with music, I had so much more autonomy and freedom. You know, I was able to create these worlds that I would be performing in myself, and have a lot more control.
So I guess it was around 2009 where the four of you started to play music as the Ambassadors, right?
Yeah.
And this was, I mean, you're in New York. I mean, the first decade of the 2000s, the second decade of the 2000s. I mean, these were very distinctive, very
the
sort
best.
of important kind of musical periods, right, in New York, like the early 2000s, the Strokes and the Yeah Yeah Yeahs and Interpol and all those bands, and then you've got like the 2010s. TV on the Radio and Grizzly Bear. Who else was
Yay Sayer.
Yay Sayer, yeah.
Who else? Oh, I mean, I guess you could maybe say Vampire Weekend, right?
Yeah, Vampire Weekend, sure, yeah. So you're in New York.
LCD Sound System.
LCD Sound System, which is really kind of like fruitful period of music. And you guys are starting out as a band. And tell me about, I don't know, was it just trying to break into the scene at the time?
It was so impossible for us. We were so not cool. We were so not as cool as any of those other bands. I loved those bands. I emulated those artists to the best of my ability. But what came out was always this kind of like pop, alternative rock, like radio rock sound. I remember so vividly. So in 2010, we made our first official like EP. I had been speaking to this guy, this producer, and he had produced a couple really cool, like buzzy, pitchforky indie bands. And he had heard a song of mine that he liked and was interested in producing our EP. He wanted to charge us like a lot of money, and we just had no money, so we couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Make this EP, and we're so proud of it. And it's got a couple songs on it that ended up being on our first EP with Interscope. And I remember showing it to him, sending it to him, and the response I got was, "Wow, you guys made like a radio rock record. Okay, good luck with that." And it was so, I just like, oh, that stung. It stung, but it also like just gave me so much more juice.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder at that time, right? So 2009, you're performing as ambassadors. By the way, did you graduate from school?
I did.
Or did you drop
I
out?
did.
You did.
No,
Okay.
I did. I did all 4 years. I don't know how, but I did.
I mean, you say it was impossible to break in. So presumably, like just finding gigs to play, just finding venues to play at.
So hard.
I mean, were you playing for free? Were you just playing wherever? Yeah.
We played there was a place called Spike Hill in Williamsburg that was like right off the L train off the Bedford stop, and they would have shows. We did a lot of shows like the ones at Spike Hill where you get on stage and a jar would be passed around essentially to like tip the band, and we get a couple drink tickets and that was it. Very run and gun, throwing our stuff on stage. It was so chaotic. We played shows. There were a lot of really cool DIY venues in Bushwick and Williamsburg at the time. And, we played a few shows at those places, but those places were pretty well gate kept,
Yeah.
We got whatever we could. The first show that we played together was a benefit concert for a play that I was doing with a bunch of my friends at New School, and we did it at this kind of weird cafe called Goodbye Blue Monday in deep in Bushwick. And again, that was like, we didn't get paid. We didn't get paid for years. Most of the time we spent in New York, we spent rehearsing and writing. And
so, I mean, so on like a day-to-day basis, right? Here you are, you're like 21, 22. I think you're working at a restaurant too.
I was working many jobs. Okay. I worked at a restaurant. I worked at a doggy daycare center. I worked at a cafe. I was a babysitter. I worked at my friend's bookstore. I was like just doing a million.
Piecing things together to
renting out this was like at the beginning of Airbnb, so I was like renting out my room in my apartment, trying to essentially keep the apartment. I was staying with my girlfriend, who's now my wife. I was staying at her place, renting my room out across the street, doing whatever I could to just scrape by.
And meantime, during the day or whenever you had time, you guys would rehearse, the four of you? Yeah,
we'd rehearse all the time. We were rehearsing at least 5 days a week, if not 6. I think.
Where, by the way, were you rehearsing?
We had a space that was right 2 blocks away from my apartment, luckily, on Meserole Street in Bushwick. And before that, we had a place on South 6th. Before that, when we weren't able to afford a rehearsal space, and all these rehearsal spaces that we had, we'd share with other bands. We had another rehearsal space that was at the Pfizer building, like deep into Bed-Stuy. And before that, we would just rent out the hourly places. Like there was this place called Funkadelic in Midtown, and you'd be on the subway with your guitars and your keyboards, and you'd carry it up a crazy amount of stairs. And we spent a lot of time rehearsing and just cutting our teeth.
Sam, tell me a little bit about I want to talk about the business side of a band in a moment, because a lot of, a significant, a not insignificant part of a band is thinking about it like a business, in the sense that you've got to convince people to let you perform, and then you've got to expose your music to people and market it, and some of it is just luck, and we'll talk about that later. But I wonder from just like from the perspective of what you were sounding like at the beginning, right? We mentioned these bands like Vampire Weekend or Grizzly Bear or TV on the Radio, and it's hard to describe in a few words exactly what those bands were, but you knew they were New York bands. There was that kind of New York sensibility about them, certainly at that time. How were you thinking about what you guys sounded like or wanted to sound like?
I think we wanted to incorporate elements from these bands that we loved into something that had a bit more of a pop sensibility. Again, I think that where I grew up and at the time when I grew up, I didn't really get exposed to a lot of different, a lot of like indie or kind of under the radar stuff until I basically moved to right before I moved to New York City. I started kind of a band called Arcade Fire came to Ithaca and played in the cafeteria, and I saw that
Heard of
show. I snuck into that show, and it changed my life. It was amazing, So
Wow.
I was slowly. I came very late to it. So the stuff that I grew up on that was just so in my DNA was like verse, pre-chorus, chorus, verse, pre-chorus, chorus. I liked something that felt hooky. I liked something that felt big. I think that what I wanted to do with the band was create a sound that felt like it was reaching out rather than closing in. I think that a lot of that has to do with just who I am as a person, but also about like where Casey and I grew up and where Casey Noah and I grew up.
Tell me about how you began to develop your voice and what you wanted that voice to sound like. A lot of times we've had guests on the show who talk about, and this is normal, in the early days, you emulate the people that you respect and that you love. Jewel talking about trying to be, Ella Fitzgerald and I mean, because there is a soulfulness to your voice, right? And there's I think that's a good description of how it sounds. And I wonder. I mean, I've sort of gone back and listened to so much of your music, including your early work. Is it pronounced Litoast? Litoast. Litoast, which was a track which will factor very importantly in your career in a moment. But how are you thinking about what you wanted, because your voice is also another instrument, right? In a band, in the song. How were you thinking about that?
I mean, you touched on something that I think was a point of pride, both pride and frustration in the early days. I love to sing. I'm like a singer, I had grew up. The voices that I fell in love with were, Ray Charles and Sam Cooke and Aretha Franklin and I also loved the energy of like an Iggy Pop or like an Anthony Kiedis. I keep talking about the Chili Peppers because I don't know. There was something about that band when I was a kid that just so fascinated me. But I liked unique voices. I also loved Caleb Followell from Kings of Leon. These like very distinct voices. Nina Simone. Who else? I'm trying to think of like. Otis Redding. These like singular. You hear them and you just know who it is, right? And it sticks out like a sore thumb. I wanted that quality in my vocal, and so I would try to emulate whoever it was that week that I was obsessed with. I think it's only just recently that I've kind of like opened my eyes and felt like, oh, I have a sound. I have my own sound. I have my own voice. When I sing things, it's taken me that long to kind of feel that and recognize that. But to the other point, it was frustrating because I also felt like there were no bands that I knew of that were popular at the time that had that quality to their voice, that were in Brooklyn, that were getting the gigs that I wanted to get. I felt like all of those singers, had these very kind of like clean, mellow sounds that blended in with the textures of everything else around them. And mine, again, kind of, I wanted it to stick out like a sore thumb.
When you guys were performing and, playing any gigs you could get, I've read you talk about this time as being a very frustrating period because you felt like the music you were making was really good, and that if only people heard it, then they would feel that way too.
Yeah, it was very frustrating. I remember that distinctly, and I remember it as this kind of like, am I crazy? You're like the self-doubt was kind of there and gone and there and gone and there and gone. I was so I had blinders on, really. I was just so focused on making this work and making music that I was hearing in my head and that I felt was really, really good. And then looking around and being like, why does no one care? Why can't we get these gigs? I can run laps around that front person of that band,
Mm-hmm.
And we have such a unique thing going on with me and my brother. Like, why aren't we? It was very, very frustrating. And I think it took slowly getting out of New York for that to change, and not thinking of that as like the end all be all of being like a successful New York band.
How did you make the transition from just not being able to break out of that to actually getting a chance to go tour with another band called Lights? How did that happen? I mean, was it just you guys were available, or you made the pitch, or because that would prove to be hugely important?
Yeah, it was a combination of just blind determination and luck. I had a friend who, prior to this, we had started getting a couple actually good gigs. A friend of mine who was in a band in New York, I asked his advice on how to get gigs because we had no representation. We had nothing. And he told me to do this, and this is what I did. I made an email account from a guy named Paul Lewis. It was just paullewis@gmail.com. And I emailed all these venues just cold.
Paul Lewis is a fake person.
A fake person,
yes, okay.
A fake manager that I made up. And I would email these venues and have a very like brief, hey, I see, these dates, you don't have a first of three, would love to get my guys ambassadors on the bill. Send a link to the music. Thanks. And we got a gig at Mercury Lounge. We got a couple gigs at Mercury Lounge, which is a very, very well-known venue. It's still around. It's awesome. And we'd show up and play the gigs, and the booking agent or the promoter would come up to me and be like, "Where's Paul?" And I'm like, "Oh, he couldn't make it. He's got another band that's playing somewhere else." So we had done these little gigs. I had a friend, Christine, who worked at a music charity organization, and she was she and I had coffee one day, and she was like, "How can I help? You guys are great. I want to help." And I said, "Well, we need a manager." And she said, "Well, I don't know any managers, but I do know this woman, Samantha Cox at BMI." So there's the PRO companies, the big ones are ASCAP and BMI.
Yep.
I met with Samantha. She heard our music. She loved the music. And she said, "How can I help you?" Same thing. I was like, "We need a manager." And she set us up on like 2 or 3 different blind dates with managers. And one of them was with our current manager, Seth Callan. And that was in 2011. And Seth then got us our booking agent, Dave Galea, who we're still with. We're very loyal, very loyal. We also are very lucky because the people on our team are very good at what they do. And Galea was the one that got us that Lights tour. It's a very long-winded explanation, but I feel like that's good context.
I mean, you know, in 90% of the cases, that might have been it, right? That you got to open up for this band, and because that story has been experienced by thousands of people,
Yeah.
thousands of bands, right? You go on tour, you're an opening act, and then you get a little bit of traction, but it's not enough, and eventually you move on and you do something else with your life.
Yeah.
And that is the story that we don't hear because we don't know those stories.
Yeah.
And that could have been your story too. Even great bands, even bands with great potential.
Yeah.
It just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But for some reason, this song that you guys made, can you tell me about this song, Lee Toast?
It was a song that I wrote after I had my heart broken by a girl who did not love me as much as I loved her. It was an unrequited love, and I was very torn up about it. And I wrote this sad 5-minute long acoustic ballad, and I got my friend Meredith to make this beautiful string arrangement for it. It was always going to be kind of just an outlier on our EP. And somehow, after we got our manager, somehow the song made it onto a playlist that was heard by a radio jockey in Norfolk, Virginia. And
it just got on a playlist.
It was on a playlist.
By the way, it's a weird name. It's like a Czech word.
Yeah,
it means a state of agony. It's not like you would name. It's not like the easiest title to name a pop song. Like it's a weird title. It's a beautiful song, but like if you're looking to get the song on airplay, it's, call like, I don't know, party anthem or whatever,
right.
something.
No, it was this.
You call it State of Agony in Czech.
I was reading a lot of Milan Kundera at the time, and I thought that it would be I thought I was very clever in titling it.
And only like 5 people are like, oh, I know that word. But everyone else is like, what is this? Litost?
Oh,
what is this song?
God. So funny. So cringy thinking about it.
But it's a beautiful song. It's a great track.
Thank you.
This song somehow gets on like a playlist, which is suggested songs that you might want to play.
It wasn't even that. It was like a playlist that some Tumblr person had put together that this radio DJ found, and then picked that song out and played it on the radio, and people kept calling in and requesting it. And
this is in Norfolk, Virginia.
Yes, in Norfolk, Virginia.
Okay,
near Newport News.
And were you aware of it being played down there?
We started to. Seth, I think, let us know, like, hey, this radio station's playing this acoustic song on your EP. They're actually playing it a lot. It ended up that year being their number one. It was like Lee Toast by Ambassadors and then like the Foo Fighters on this one alternative rock station. We would be
You were
playing,
still Ambassadors at that point.
We were still Ambassadors.
Okay.
Yeah. We would play show. I remember so vividly. We were playing, to maybe 50 people at our shows. And
at the Mercury Lounge.
The Mercury Lounge, or wherever. If we got a show at like... I remember being at DC9 in DC. Actually, the night before, we played a show in Norfolk, Virginia at this venue called the Norva. Sold it out. 1,400 people.
Wow.
And the next night, we went and played DC9 to 10 people. And that was like, it was this weird kind of alternate reality in
It's the pre-social media era, too, so that could happen. I mean, it's less likely to happen today. That you could be huge in Norfolk and then just a couple hours north, 10 people.
It was so bizarre. But that song was kind of the perfect example of you just never know what is going to be the thing that's going to be a catalyst for the other thing. And because of that song, so many doors were open to us. But it was funny. I mean, after that song came out, there's military helicopters flying over my house right now. Okay, they're going away. Anyways, that song comes out and has does its thing on that one station, instantly all of these major labels want to meet with us because it like when you have a song that's doing well on radio and you're an unsigned band it like pops up on this
Like a
media base.
database?
Yeah, like a media base thing.
So there were labels that could see that this song was really taking off in Norfolk.
Yeah, yeah.
And but only in Norfolk, not beyond.
Yeah, but only in Norfolk. But it was
Yeah.
like they were playing it a lot.
And this was a major pop station.
Yes,
Or, like,
major
alternative.
alternative station. And so we met with all these labels, and
These are small labels.
no, these are big labels. This is Atlantic. This is Universal Republic.
Wow.
This is
On the strength of this song being played
Yeah.
in Norfolk, really, that's amazing.
Well,
So
because
because you
radio-
were unsigned.
yeah, because
Yeah.
radio was so important at the time for major
Yeah.
labels. It was like the last thing that they were all kind of clinging on to, pre-streaming, and so this thing popped up on their databases, and they were all like, "This band, let's get them while they're fresh." And I met with all of them, and I think I ruined all of these meetings because they all kind of asked me if we were trying to make an album that felt like this one song, acoustic and folky, and they were, they were all asking us if we wanted to be like kind of like a Lumineers-y Mumford and Sons band, and I just
Right.
said no. I wanted to make this kind of weird hybrid, like alternative R&B rock thing, and they
Yeah.
all said, "Okay, good luck," and no, none of them signed us.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wait, I mean, you didn't consider just lying to them and just saying, "Yeah, absolutely,
I
we want to
should
be the
have.
next
I
Mumford and
totally
Sons."
should have. I don't know, man. There was something in me that was like, I can't lie to these people and tell them that I can't dig myself that hole, because I need
But that might have been your only chance.
I know.
That might have been your only shot.
I know. I think there's like this arrogance and naivety that exists when you're in your early 20s that I don't know. It comes out in weird ways. Like, I think on any other day, I probably would have done exactly what you said and just lied and been like, yeah, absolutely. The people pleaser in me would have just come out.
Happy to make another Lumineers. Yeah, because
Yeah.
those were big bands. In
Big
2012.
bands. But for some reason, in all of those meetings, I couldn't lie. And I was like, no, I don't really want to make just that kind of stuff.
Okay, so that could have been the end of that.
There's
But
so
then
many
there's
moments
this-
like this. It's great. Yeah.
But then there's a story, and I'm not sure how apocryphal it is, so I'll let you tell it.
Yeah.
But it involves Dan Reynolds, the lead singer of Imagine Dragons, who happened to be in Norfolk.
Yeah. So they were.
Is this an accurate story?
yes,
Is this real?
Yes, it is. So they were
Okay,
in
so tell
Norfolk
us, yeah.
playing a show.
They were playing an arena or whatever because they
yes,
were huge.
Yes. I mean, at the time, I think they may have actually been playing like either an amphitheater or a big theater there. They were
Right.
just on. They were like, it was like things were really hot. They were the next
Right.
year. They were playing amphitheaters and arenas.
It was maybe a year or two before Thunder or
Yes.
those songs, but
Yeah.
they were already big.
And they were driven by a guy who worked at the radio station. And Dan asked the guy what he was listening to, and he said, this band Ambassadors, they have a song that's on the radio for this station that's here, but that's not the song I'm going to play you. I'm going to play you this other song of theirs that he found. We did this acoustic performance of a song called Unconsolable at this thing called Alter TV in Pittsburgh. And this guy showed Dan this video of us performing it acoustically. And Dan showed it to first his wife at the time, and his wife was like, these guys are incredible. What are you going to do with this? And he was like, I don't know. I guess maybe I'll show it to Alex the Kid, who is the head of Kid in the Corner, which was the label that signed Imagine Dragons. And Alex and Dan worked very closely. Alex's label was through Interscope. And Alex saw this video, and we got this email kind of after everything had kind of crumbled with all these other meetings with these labels. And we thought, it's just kind of back to square one. We get this email that Alex the Kid wants to meet with Sam and talked to him about his music. He's interested in potentially signing the band. And yeah, that was such a strange turn of events. That's how we kind of got on his radar and Interscope's radar.
So you signed with Interscope in 2013, and they were okay with the vision that you had of what you wanted to be?
Yeah. And I think what helped was, Alex and I pretty quickly, because Alex came from, more of a hip hop R&B background, and then sort of stumbled into working with Imagine Dragons. And we really connected on that level because that was kind of the first genre that I fell in love with was R&B, and then right after that I was like a real hip hop head like for many years, and so we connected on that and started making music together before we signed. And I think the combination of him seeing my vision and seeing that it aligned with his own, us making music together, that sold us to Interscope.
All right, so you signed with Interscope. It's described at the time as a crappy record deal by you.
Oh, the worst. The absolute worst. I mean, it was like, but no different than any other, young band signing.
Right. You want a record deal, and they're going to give you terms that are going to be maximally beneficial for them.
Yeah, I'll tell you. So we had two deals. There was one deal from a really solid. It was a solid deal with an indie label, and it was very fair and equitable. But that label hadn't really had any success with any of their artists.
Yeah.
And then we had this deal from Interscope Records, arguably like the biggest label at the time, biggest major label at the time. And it was a 360, just like terrible. And we did that because I was like, I want to aim as high as we possibly can. Took that risk.
Yeah. One of the things that, as you're working on this EP that you would put out, Love Songs, Drug Songs, because you were still working on your first studio album, which would be VHS. You got a chance to tour with Imagine Dragons, and I'm curious. I imagine that was like an amazing opportunity to hone, like just being on stage, just performing in front of lots of people, because they're playing huge venues. You're an opening act. Yeah. Oftentimes, it's just filling up, and it's not really that full.
Man, yeah.
It's a humbling experience, right?
It was so wild. This is my favorite story to tell, because like we would roll up to these venues in our van. At that point we had a Ford E350 15-passenger van and a trailer. I don't even know if we had a trailer at that point. I think most of the gear was just kind of
shoved all your stuff.
We took out the back two rows, and it was just like, you'd kind of pray that you didn't hit like a stop too short, and the keyboard would fly and like knock your head off.
Right.
So we'd roll up to the venue in our rinky-dink van, park next to their 2 tour buses and 3 semis full of stage equipment. We would go out on stage before the show, line check really quickly, and then the doors would open, and we'd go backstage. We'd go backstage, let it fill up a little bit, hit stage right on time, play a show, in either an arena or an amphitheater to thousands of people, more people than we'd ever played for before.
Yeah,
giving it 200%, everything that we had. And it would, I would like thank everybody. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. And I'd get right down on my hands and knees and like start unplugging my pedal board. And my brother was like crawling around the stage, like yelling at me like, Sam, where's the power box? Can you help me find the power? I can't see where and I'd like run over to him, and our drummer's like, just like has like a floor tom and a snare and is walking off stage. It was just absolute chaos. It was so funny to go from like, I'm a rock star to then I am frantically I'm like carrying everything and, off stage. And it was the most ridiculous, but I loved it so much. And it was wonderful to watch the Dragons guys do what they were doing on stage. They're such a big band, and the showmanship that Dan in particular has on stage was very, very inspiring.
Yeah, I mean, what did you learn from watching? Because people were coming to see Imagine Dragons, right? Now, of course, they come to see Ex-Ambassadors separately, but at the time, they didn't know who you were. They didn't know your music. They weren't singing your songs. There might have been like one or two people who were like, woo!
Yeah.
But most people are getting their drinks and kind of getting to their seats.
Yeah.
When you're watching Dan Reynolds and Imagine Dragons perform at that time, what do you remember kind of learning from him and just watching what he did?
Well, I mean, it wasn't just him, too. It was the whole band and the production. We learned a lot about, we learned how important transitioning between our songs was, something that was always kind of an afterthought for us, about building in moments that aren't on the record, that are just purely for the crowd, whether it's like a complete breakdown and I get to teach teach people in the audience a part of the song that's easily sung, or if there's a moment that we can do something impressive, they had this incredible thing at the time where they would all start playing drums. That was a big thing, I think, with a lot of bands at the time. But to their credit, I think they were doing it. They were doing it the best. Haim too. It was like them and Haim. I felt like both had like really epic drum things in their sets. So little tricks like that were the biggest things that I think we took away.
And you guys did have a hit. I mean, you had managed to hit the charts with Jungle in 2013. I mean, you'd gone from playing 10 to 10 people a year earlier to having a song in the top 100.
Yeah, but it was so funny because even that one, it had this huge placement in a Beats by Dre headphone campaign for the World Cup. Jay-Z got on a remix of it. It was it was being synced in every movie and film.
It's in so many movies.
It was everywhere. And that was everyone was like, all right, this is it. This is where it starts, know? And it just didn't take off at radio. It just kind of fell flat and didn't do what we thought it would. And that was really frustrating and I think sobering, because when even if you have a huge machine behind you, and I think this is more true today than it's ever been, you can have the biggest machine behind you. All of the pieces can be lined up exactly in the right place, and something still might not work commercially. And
I think you'd already, around this time, you'd written Unsteady, right? I mean, you'd written some, that was a song that and maybe even were performing it.
Yeah, we were performing it. I had written it. I remember it was on an EP, our second EP, called The Reason. And when we had submitted it to the label, they had told us that they didn't think there was a radio song on it. And they weren't going to go to radio with anything, and we were so bummed. But for some reason, that song really we believed in it. And Alex, who is executive producing and producing our whole record, he really believed in that one too. So, it stuck around for the album.
So the story I've heard about Renegades is that Alex, who you're the producer, kind of approached you and said, and sort of talked to you about an idea for a song. Yeah. But I guess there was some connection to the Jeep Renegade.
I'll tell you, it's the funniest thing. I got tricked into writing that song, kind of. In a great way. I mean, I'm so happy that I did get tricked into writing this. But at the time, the way Alex and I worked was I was just constantly, he would send me beats that he had made, and I was folders full of them, hundreds of beats, and I would try to write to every single one. I was constantly just sending him hook ideas or full songs or just melodies, just everything. It was a constant flow of songs back and forth.
Most of the songs are never produced, never saw the light of day.
Yeah, most of them, thank God they never saw the light of day, because some of them are so bad. But that's the process, right?
That's the process, yeah.
Anyway, so, and we had just had this thing, Jungle didn't work, and then we made this EP that we poured so much energy into, and the label had said there wasn't a radio song on it, so they weren't going to go to radio, and I was just at my wit's end. I was splitting my time between New York and LA because I was writing so much in LA and with Alex, and then starting to write with other people as well. And
by the way, the deal with Interscope was like a multi-record. Like you'd done EPs, but you had to make a studio album, at least one.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And so we're trying to make this first record, and we had. I was again at my wit's end. Alex every once in a while would, say like, hey, I have an idea for a song called this, or maybe you write a song about this. This day he hit me up. He's like, yo, I want you to write a song called Renegade or Renegades, or just use that word in something.
Renegade.
Yeah. And I was like, okay, great, cool. So, I sat down and as I did every day, at that point and tried to just write something. I ended up coming up with this chorus to a beat that he had sent me. And he was like, I like this. Keep going on this. Maybe write
You came up with the, I said, hey,
Yeah.
hey.
Yeah.
Part.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he was like, keep writing this, keep working on it. I was at my wife's parents' house in Massachusetts in her bedroom, and I'm like recording vocals on an SM57, sitting on her bed while her mom is like making a little, cheese and crackers plate for us in the next room. As I'm writing this, Alex is also telling me, he's like, if we can really get this right, I may have like a cool sync opportunity with Jeep for a song like this. I was like, great, okay, cool. Finish the song, send it to him. He likes it, and he's like, all right, I'll get back to you and let you know how the thing pans out with Jeep. And just out of curiosity, I go to the Jeep website. I'm like, I wonder what their new car is that they're trying to feature. And it was the Jeep Renegade. So I got kind of tricked into writing a jingle, but this jingle changed my life.
So this song, I mean, he said Renegade, and you wrote a song about, pioneers, new kid, the underdogs, right? I'm quoting the song.
Yeah.
And in your mind, because there's a video, there are a few videos for the song, but the one I think many people have seen is people who are disabled doing incredible things, like incredible athletic feats.
Yeah.
And your brother, of course, is also featured in it towards the end. Was that something you had in mind when you were writing that song?
Yeah. I mean, I think at that point I had grown so much as a songwriter, just having done it so much. And I knew that for anything to be good, I had to try and put as much of myself and my story into it, and my perspective into it as I possibly could. In writing a song with that title, I was like, okay, what is this? How can I, where's my in emotionally? And I think that it started thinking about us as a band, and thinking about how I had always felt like, we were just on the periphery trying so
you were
hard.
outsiders.
Yeah. Trying so hard to get in, outsiders. And in addition to that, thinking about the way that we operate as a band is so different than any other band that I knew of at the time. Having my brother in the band just changes the dynamic. We, I think, inherently were more attentive to each other's needs and emotions, and just there was like a different level of devotion that we had to each other, a deeper level of devotion that we had to each other, that I think set us apart. And I wanted to visually, I wanted to touch on that a little bit, and that's where the idea came in, to incorporate all these, differently abled folks into this video. And
it's so powerful.
Yeah,
it's such a powerful video,
Thank
especially the emotional power of seeing your brother, because it's just unusual. It's not as common to see anybody with a disability in a band.
Yeah. And I
today.
mean, let me tell
they're
you,
just not visible.
it was so, in the early days, it was like so insane. It was just like, I would lead Casey by the shoulders through like throngs of people in like these dark and dimly lit clubs, and he's got a keyboard on his back and he's carrying a keyboard in his hand, and I've got my guitar, and we're like stepping on stage and he's knocking into people and knocking over people's drinks, and then we get on stage and I'm trying to set up my stuff and help him at the same time, and like it was just chaos all the time. But I think it really did force us all to be very conscious of each other and in a really special way.
It's interesting because actually I think the fact that it was a Jeep Renegade ad could have worked to your disadvantage, right? Like it could have been something where people are like, oh, I'm not going to pay attention to the song for this brand. But it reminds me a lot of Sting's song Desert Rose, which not the actual sound of the song, but I don't know if you know the story, but that's his most successful single ever, more than Roxanne, anything he's ever done. He has sold, Desert Rose sold more copies than anything he ever did. And that song he did with his manager, why am I blanking? It was his brother's, Miles Copeland. And Miles Copeland had this idea for them to film it in a Jaguar in the desert, the car, the Jaguar. Yeah. It was a the brand new model of it. And the video is basically Sting in the back of a Jaguar driving through the desert with a camcorder. It was, this is like the late 90s.
Yeah.
He then took that video to Jaguar and said, well, do you guys want to work with us? And they did. The song had been out, but the commercial exposed Desert Rose. I think it was aired during the World Cup to hundreds of millions of people, and it just blew up.
Yeah.
It became massive.
I think at the time, too, there had started to become less stigma around bands and artists having their music in commercials.
With the brand.
I think Apple and the iPhone, or not, I guess the iPhone, yes, was a thing at the time, but the iPod and iTunes and that had started to kind of be like, if you got your song in, an Apple commercial, that was such great exposure. I remember Phoenix had their song in a Cadillac commercial. That was very big for them. And I think it did. I mean, it was the best thing that could have possibly happened to us at a time when, it was in such a weird, we were in such a weird transitional period in the music industry. This was like streaming was just barely starting to be a thing, and nobody was sure how to make money off of music anymore. And commercial syncs and TV and film syncs were the surest way outside of touring to make any sort of an income and make any sort of an impact, I think.
Yeah. Tell me what that did for you guys. I mean, first of all, by the way, the Jeep commercial is also really emotive. I mean, there's a scene of them jumping in the water, skinny dipping. I mean, it's just it's very emotive in how it just shows young people, like just young people doing things, not reckless, but just being bold. Or it's actually a good commercial. Yeah. And I imagine that because that was such a huge hit. It was such a big song. And you guys you had some visibility with Jungle, but this was different. And then Unsteady would follow that.
Yeah.
Do you remember feeling a very rapid shift in just your life and how you were now perceived in the industry?
Yes, but it was also so mired in my own fear of it all going away. I was just like, things were happening at such a fast pace. When they started happening, when we started playing bigger shows and people were singing the words to my songs, and we were being played on the radio, I don't think I'm the only person to ever, talk about this feeling, but for me, I was like, it was a little bit of a breath of relief, a sigh of relief, because that's what I always had hoped. That's what I had envisioned. So it was kind of like, okay, great. Thank God that's happening. But oh my God, what am I going to do about this? And what am I going to do about this? And how am I going to follow it up? And I'm still on the road, and I'm trying not to lose my voice, and I'm still writing because I have to go up from here. I have to level up. I was so just unable to appreciate the things that were happening at the time. My manager told me this recently and reminded me of this. We were at the Montreux Jazz Festival in Montreux, and it's like one of the most beautiful.
This is in 2015?
This is in 2015. One of the most beautiful places in the whole world.
Yeah.
My dad, when he remarried, he married an English woman, my stepmother, Nicola, and so he was in England. He was like, I'm going to fly to Switzerland and see my son play at the Montreux Jazz Festival. This is his dream come true. My dad is there. My dad is at this hotel, and I text my manager, who is also there. I'm like, hey, can you have dinner with my dad? I have to finish writing this verse for this new song. I'm up in my hotel room, and I'm just like working on something that I don't even remember what it was.
Yeah.
But I had to send it to Alex immediately. He was texting me being like, when are you going to send me this thing? And I was working on it. I was putting all this pressure on myself. And so I made my manager have dinner with my dad, who I hadn't seen in so long, when I'm in Montreux, Switzerland, because I had to finish a verse for a song that never came out.
Yeah.
That was where my head was at, if that gives you any indication of where I was at the time. And it's really hard. It's really hard to even kind of think about it again and go back there, because I just want to shake myself and be like, dude, look where you are, breathe a little bit. But it's a hard thing to do, and to learn how to do.
Many creative people aren't able to do that, because, as you say, they always feel like any success is fleeting, and I understand that impulse, right? I think it's something that a lot of people can understand. You get something hits, and you're not going to sit back and be like, now I can just relax, like it's happened. You're like, oh, now, okay, I got lucky. Now I got to go to the next thing. I got to figure out the next thing. Yeah.
And you think in your head, and you start to kind of believe that there is a sort of system. There is a way. You're like, oh, I think I finally figured it out. Okay, so now I have to do this again, but I have to do it even better and bigger. And the reality is, there really is no rhyme or reason to any of this. I think that we all wish there was, but there just really isn't. And that is a hard pill to swallow, especially when you taste it for a second. You taste that success. You start making money, and you're like, oh my God, this is, and then you have people around you too. I think at the time I was surrounding myself in LA with a lot of these music industry folks who kind of treated it like it was sports, you got to level up, and you got to make sure you're ready for the next game, and get your mental right, and no sleep till success, just all these awful slogans that were just, spinning around in my head constantly. It was a really tough time for me.
You were presumably putting a lot of pressure on yourself to try and recreate the success of Unsteady and Renegades.
Yeah, absolutely. And how did that affect your creative process? I mean, did it, I don't know, were you just constantly throwing things out, just tearing things apart? I don't know. What did that We scrapped an entire record. I mean, it took us 4 years after our first album to put out our second album. Granted, there were a lot of other circumstances happening. Noah left the band at that time, and that was a long, drawn out, very painful process. And I also stopped working with Alex at the time. We had a falling out, and his label also left Interscope. So what happens in a situation like that when you sign with a JV that's with a major label, that label, their contract expires, they leave, you're still with that major label. So we were still with Interscope. And at that point I had a pretty good relationship with them, but from a business standpoint, they're only making half the money off of us, and the other half is with some guy who's at a totally different place.
Yes. So their interest is less. Their incentive is lower.
Yes.
Because you mentioned this album that you worked on, Joyful. It was supposed to be Joyful, that you just scrapped the whole album.
Yeah, we scrapped the whole record. We put a couple songs out from it. That song, Joyful, a song called Ahead of Myself, and another song called Don't Stay. I think I really had to... Those 4 years were like me kind of getting back on my feet and reinventing myself as an artist, and a writer. I had to make a new band. It was just 3 of us now. Noah left.
Yeah,
right? Noah left
in 2016.
He stopped playing with us in 2016, and officially we parted ways in 2018. And that was a huge emotional blow too, because this is my best friend since I was 5. And
was that a falling out or?
I mean, it was complicated. There, I can't go into it too much,
Sure.
But it was not something I wanted. There were seeds of it that were around for a long time, but just the separation, was slow and painful, and I think I tried to make it work many, many times, and forgave a lot of behavior, on his part, and then also on my part, and just kind of looked the other way, and it finally just came to a head, and it was untenable, and it was heartbreaking. So I had to really kind of reconfigure in my head who we were, and luckily around that time, I was also able to write with all these new incredible writers and meet all these new people in LA. So yes, it's, like we scrapped a whole record because we couldn't figure out what our next sound was going to be. And I had this looming thing over my head of like, how am I going to match this success that we had on our first record? I don't want to have a sophomore slump. No way. But we kind of did. And you know what? I'm still here. And I think that's like the biggest lesson out of all this, is when something like that happens.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder whether I wonder how you because you put out Orion, right, the next record, and then COVID hits not that long after, right? And COVID was kind of a hidden blessing for some people in a way, because it forced all of us we had to kind of focus, and we had time.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether, I know that during that time you put out some really great covers. Your cover of Blinding Lights is so good.
Thanks. Yeah.
So good. Anybody listening should go on YouTube and check that out. It's a beautiful song. It's a great cover. But I wonder if during that time you were able to figure out how to let go of that fear a little bit. If you were able to let go of that fear and just say, you know what, screw it. I'm just going to write stuff that I want to write.
Yeah, I definitely did. It was such a beautiful, as terrifying as that whole ordeal was, it was a very fruitful time for me creatively. I had also, there had been other. One thing that actually helped lead me back to that feeling of like, if I write stuff that I really love and that does something in here for me, that's kind of where it starts and stops, like beyond that, I have no control and I don't really care to try and figure out how it all works. When we met Lizzo and worked on her first record, that was truly like, I heard her EP, and she was relatively like unknown, at the time. I heard this EP, I heard her voice, and I was like, she's amazing. I would love to. It was kind of sent to me like, do you want to maybe work with her? I was like, yes, I would love to write with her. Because I had had some success writing for some other artists at that point, and my name was kind of getting thrown into the ring. And just off of that, just off of loving her voice and loving her music, we get into a room together and we make "'Cause I Love You," Jerome, "Heaven Help Me," and we write a couple other songs too in like 2 days. Her and myself.
And your brother also has, and Adam.
Yeah, it was me and Adam and Casey and then Lizzo, and we were all in the room together. It was like a new band.
I would love to have been there.
It was so fun, and
just hanging out.
Yeah, it was it was awesome, and just there was no ego. There was no we wanted to make cool stuff together, and then lo and behold, her career just takes off.
Yeah,
and that was just because I really loved it and had fun doing it. So that became my North Star. And then COVID hit, and that became even more of my North Star because I'm like, well, I could die any second, so I might as well just make stuff that I really love. And I'm so glad that I finally found that again.
Sam, tell me a little bit about. We're going to talk about your new record in a moment, but I want to talk about you as a solo artist too, because you perform as Sam Nelson, not as Sam Harris. And I imagine maybe that's because there is another Sam Harris who's a famous philosopher and neuroscientist.
Yes, and then it's funny too because like I'm like, all right, we landed on Sam Nelson. I sent a million different names out to my manager and showed it to my wife, and like I was like, okay, Sam Nelson. It's my middle name, Sam Nelson. Clean, easy. Now, of course, on my like. If you go on Spotify and there's like "This is Sam Nelson," it's like a bunch of my songs, and then there's like some ambient music made by a guy named Sam Nelson. I can't escape it. I can't get a name that sticks.
That's all right. I mean, yeah, but because Sam Harris is a brilliant, thoughtful guy, but there's a Sam Harris.
Yeah.
I saw this a story you did a post on Instagram about this a while back, and it's a great story. And I guess you were playing at this place called Pioneer Town, which is out in near Joshua Tree National Park in California. It's a beautiful venue. U2 has played there. Paul McCartney. It's like a crazy place. And tell me what happened. You were on stage and you actually, of course, played some Ex-Ambassador songs.
Yeah. So I had maybe just started putting music out, solo music out. And I was opening for another artist at Pioneer Town. I'm blanking on who it was right now, but we'll figure that out. I'm opening, and I'm playing a lot of my own solo stuff. And of course, in the show, I also play a few Ex-Ambassador songs. And my wife is in the crowd.
And you're singing Unsteady.
I'm singing Unsteady.
And it probably people are like, wow, he could really cover the song.
Yeah,
he's really hitting those notes.
So what happens is my wife is standing next to these two women, and one of them is like, "Why is this guy playing all these Ex-Ambassadors covers? Like, why is he obsessed with Ex-Ambassadors? He's played 2 Ex-Ambassador songs." And the girl next to her is like, "No, that's the guy." And she's like, "No way, that's not the guy." And my wife is just silently standing next to them, overhearing this conversation. And so I made that video. And just to be like, it's me. If you see this face singing Ex-Ambassador songs, it's because it's my band.
Yeah.
I'm the lead singer.
Yeah. Yep. All right, you have a new record out, Townie, and it's an homage in a sense to Ithaca, to where you grew up.
Yeah.
And also to, I guess, a mentor of yours and Casey's. I think he was like a theater arts.
Yeah, Todd Peterson. He was a teacher. He wore so many hats in my town. He was the like assistant vice principal at my elementary school. He ran this thing called Stewart Park Day Camp, which was a day camp at Stewart Park. I was a camper there a couple of years, and then I was also a camp counselor there. He also, he had a background in theater and dance, and had been on Broadway before moving back upstate to be with his family, and so he did a lot of the choreography for all the musical theaters, musical theater productions at my middle school, Boynton Middle School, at Ithaca High School, and helped me get ready for my auditions for college when I was doing that, and was just a huge figure in my life. But the album is. I'm so proud of this thing, and it was really it came to me in two different ways. So one was Todd's passing. He passed away in 2021, right in the middle of us touring or trying to tour, because it was like 2022, and there was like Omicron or whatever of our album Beautiful Liar, and I hear that he had passed away, and he had tried calling me like a couple months before. And I had kind of gotten to a point over the years leading up to that where I was getting annoyed at how often he'd bug me about not coming home enough, or like not responding to his calls enough. And I was like, this is getting a little like uncomfortable for me, and I'm just not. And I could also kind of get the sense that maybe he wasn't doing so great. And mentally or physically, something was. Yeah. And so I just kind of was ignoring his calls. And he calls me a couple months before he passes, and leaves me this voicemail that is actually in the end of our song Your Town, which is the song that's dedicated to him. That's the voicemail that I heard. And he's calling just to say that he had heard a new song of ours and how much he loved it and how proud he was. And I just instantly just felt this pang of guilt when I listened to it. And I texted him, and I was like, I'll call you back. Sorry I missed you. And I never did. And I, when he passed, I was just so crushed and felt so ashamed and guilty. And I think I had to grapple a lot with that in making this record and gearing up to make this record, but it kind of pointed me back home. Additionally, additionally, my brother back in 2017 bought the house that he and I grew up in. It came on the market. Oh, wow. My parents sold it when we both moved out of town in 2006, and it came back on the market. My brother had the money. Him and his wife bought it. So it's the middle of COVID. He and I and his whole family. At this point, he's got a 2-year-old son. His wife is pregnant with their second kid. We all go back to Ithaca to kind of get out of LA. It was kind of scary there. And I'm in our backyard, and I'm with my mom, and we're watching my brother play with his son in the yard, and I'm seeing him taking care of this kid. And I just like had this moment. I'm with my mom too, and I was like, oh wow, I don't need to take care of him anymore. He's taking care of his own life and this kid, this his son. And it really hit me, and I had to kind of then turn the lens back on myself in that moment and say like, oh, where does this leave me? Right? Who am I now if I don't have to care for this person?
Wow.
And that was the thing that both of those elements, losing Todd and having this thing happen to me, are the undercurrents for this record. And it pointed me back to, again, figuring out, okay, who am I? What makes me tick? Why do I tick the way that I tick? And I had been obsessed with trying to find a way to sonically encapsulate what upstate New York feels like to me. My upstate New York.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about, Hudson. I'm talking about central New York,
Yeah.
And I realized that this is a place that's kind of doesn't have an identity to a lot of people. It's this kind of faceless, nameless place. And specifically my town, Ithaca, it being a college town, so defined by these universities, the town itself and the people in it are kind of an afterthought. And growing up,
townie.
Yeah,
You're a townie.
we were townies. I didn't want to be an afterthought. I didn't want to be background noise. And I think I just kept asking myself more questions like, why? Why didn't I want that? Why was I so afraid of being overlooked and being invisible? And those questions are the questions that I decided to grapple with on this record.
Wow. Yeah. Does Casey still live there full time?
No, Casey lives in LA. They have the house in Ithaca, and he loves going back there. It's a very sacred space for him, especially being in the house that we grew up in, on the land that we grew up on.
Yeah.
He said this to me before, and he said it in this way that just like wrecked me. He was like, when I'm there, when I'm in that house and I'm in that town, I forget that I'm blind. Because I know the space so well. I know how to navigate it so well. I forget. And then I come back here to LA, or I go to New York, or I go on tour, and I'm quickly reminded, like all the frustrations that I encounter on a daily basis. But there, in that place, I forget. So that place means a lot to him.
Tell me how you imagine, you're going to tour, you're touring this for this record. I know you're going to be here actually in San Francisco, where I am, in May. And
yeah, come to the show, man.
I know, I've got to, right? When you just, on a day-to-day basis, when you just like live your day, do you have a discipline? Like, do you have, I've got to just try to write something? Do you have like a routine that you do to just make something, even if it's not good? Or do you just wait until ideas come to you?
I definitely have a lot of discipline. I do. But it's funny because the way that I worked, when I was in my 20s, my discipline was solely focused on music. I did exactly that. I was like, every day I'm going to write for at least, I'm going to sit there for 2 hours at least.
Wow.
Which turned into, more every day, and try to like write something and try to make something. And I did that for so many years. And then at one point realized I had been neglecting living an actual life and neglecting my personal physical health and mental health. And so then I started to say, okay, well, I can try to have this creative discipline, right? But I also need to become disciplined in the rest of my life. So now it's evolved to a place where I know that exercise is huge for me. I work out 6 days a week. I have to spend that hour in the gym. I wake up in the morning, first thing I make a pour over. I do a very, very, I have a scale. I weigh my beans. I hand grind my beans.
Nice. Get the 70 grams to 1,080
my ratio is
milliliters.
actually, it's 20 grams to 293.7.
Wow.
Yeah, that's
to the point
to the decimal.
That is the and the grind is like,
the grind is like medium.
Yeah.
It's like medium coarse.
You hand grind it.
Hand grind
you don't use
it.
a machine. You don't use like one of those, because you can get really good grinders now.
I know you can, but I prefer
hand
to
grind
it. I like a little.
Then you weigh it.
Yeah.
I get the weight thing,
Yeah.
because I do the 70 to 1080 milliliters.
Yeah.
But that's for a big pot of coffee.
That's for a big pot of coffee.
Yeah.
You got kids, so
That's
you need it. Yeah.
And then my kids don't drink the coffee. But and then what? You're doing the pour over, like rotating the water.
Oh yeah, I'm doing.
yeah.
I'm like
Nice.
I'm swirling it around a little
Nice.
bit, getting it evenly coated. So I make this cup of coffee, and I do this on tour too. I bring a
By the
portable
way,
rig
what
with me.
kind of coffee do you use?
Right now, I mean, I'm changing up my beans all the time, guy. Right now
Yeah.
I am on this company called Rosalind Coffee out of London. My friend James, it's his company, and
I don't know it.
they make really really great beans. There's also a place right down the street from me, Canyon Coffee, that also makes great beans.
This is good. All right.
Yeah,
I'll
I
check
like
it
an
out.
Ethiopia. Yeah, I like something fruity. I like a natural. Anyways, this is a whole other podcast.
This is a whole nother episode of the show. Like this is next level.
Yeah. I'm very specific about it, very particular. So I do this
I get
every
it.
morning, and then after that, I let my coffee sit. My reward is the coffee I sit down and I meditate for 10 minutes.
Nice.
I just use the Headspace app. I just started using it on tour. It's great.
Yep.
I do that, drink my cup of coffee, I journal, I write 3 pages. I do 3 pages every morning. And if I can do all of those things and exercise, so 4 things, I am set. And I think that now in terms of my work and my creative discipline and work, I'll be honest with you, it kind of comes and goes in waves for me. I go through periods where I still do the like, okay, sit down in front of that blank piece of paper, try to come up with something, anything, doesn't matter if it's good, just try to do it.
Yeah.
And where I'm at right now is that I've been touring for the last 6 weeks. I'm about to go on tour again. And whereas in the past, I think I was able to multitask a little better, I can't do it anymore. I really I'm just focused on like getting through the day, getting through the show. And now I'm back home for a week, and I've been cooking a lot. I haven't been thinking at all about writing, and it stresses me out. I go through these cycles too of like then getting stressed out about not being disciplined enough, and then I go back into my discipline. I'm very neurotic.
No, but that's really, but that's I think that's also a part of the process, that like stress and the discipline of getting up every day and writing 3 pages in a journal is really awesome. I mean, the thing about the process of writing music or a book or whatever, but you illustrated this you'd sit and write for 2 hours a day. It's like every day is a failure.
Yes.
And it's actually amazing.
Yeah.
Like
It's amazing.
every day there's just multiple little failures, and you just have to get up and go again. And then eventually a success comes out of it.
It's great. It's so healthy, and I can get caught up in being frustrated if I go through like 3 weeks worth of failures,
Yeah.
But still, I know it's good, and I think that for me it's right at this current moment. It's funny because I've been thinking so much about it, because I'm like, why am I'm just so tired, and I'm not doing my regular my disciplined practice creatively, and I think that's okay right now, and I think that's the next step. So I went through a phase of like, I have to be a monk. I have to be doing this every day for the rest of my life. And if I falter at all, if I slip and fall off one day, then I'm screwed, and I will never be able to write a song ever again. And my perspective now is like, I think I have to let go. I'm learning to let go a little bit, which is healthy for me.
For sure. Sam, don't ask every person on this show, but I ask most of my guests on my other show how I built this, about what they attribute their story to, and I think it's apt in this case. I mean, when you think about where you've come, I mean, you were playing to 10 people, and a year later you were opening up for Imagine Dragons, and you had a hit, a song that charted. It wasn't Jungle, wasn't what you wanted it to be, but still, I mean, less than a year after playing to 10 people, and then you had some of the biggest hits in the world, with Unsteady and with Renegades, and have become a band that can sell out, venue after venue. How much of I mean, you wanted it, and you were frustrated that nobody noticed you. But I wonder, when you think about where you are, how much of it do you attribute to the work that you put in, and how much do you think has to do with just luck?
That is a very good question. I do want to give myself credit for working very hard. As much as I do think that there's so much of making a living in the arts is luck. I do believe that there is just this X factor of timing and luck that is just there. It's omnipresent. Yeah. It's always been that way.
Yeah. But Dan Reynolds driving through Norfolk.
Right, exactly. I, however, do think that because I somehow inherited this sense of discipline and this work ethic, I remember the moment in New York when I was maybe 20, 21, and I made this choice to quit my job. I just graduated. Was I 20, 21? How old are you when you graduate college? Around that age, right?
20, yeah. Yep.
I just graduated. I was working this job at this restaurant. I got a lucky break. I got a tax refund of like $7,000 through some like loophole with my student loans. And I was like, I'm going to live off this money for the next year. I'm going to sublet my place. I'm going to still work as, a couple other jobs, but I'm going to treat music as my full-time job, even though I'm not getting paid for it. But in treating it as such, I show up to work at 9 a.m. and I clock out at 3 p.m. That's what I do every day. And I had a rehearsal space at the time. I was there every day that I was there. And I think that motivation that I had and that work ethic that I had has bled into now as a creative person. I just want to show up. I want to show up and work, not only because I'm putting this kind of, I've historically put this pressure on myself to do that.
Yeah.
But now also I just love doing it. I love it. I love it. And that's, if you can't, the second you stop loving it is when you probably should stop doing it, Right. And I still do, and I still love it. And in because of that, I want to show up to work at my best and do my best because I'm in love with this thing that's outside of myself. And so that's when the work ethic really comes in handy. And I think it also comes in handy with the luck aspect of it, because if you're around long enough, you have more chances to get lucky,
That's true.
And I think that's just carried me along. I mean, we've been a band for over 15 years.
Wow.
And yes, we had that, there was that period of time where we were playing to 10 people, and then we had a song on the radio, and it was very quick when that happened. But leading up to that, there was from 2007 is really when we first started writing together. So 2007 to 2014, like when Jingle was on the radio. That's 7 years. It's patience. It's patience, but that patience can only really not drive you crazy if you love it. If you just love making stuff.
Sam, good luck on the tour. It's a that's a lot of dates coming up.
Yeah, you're telling me, man.
It's pretty relentless, but I'm sure it'll also be fun at times.
Yes.
Congrats on the new record, and thanks so much for coming on the show.
Oh, Guy, this has been such a treat. I was so nervous right before I talked to you, because you've talked to so many incredible people on this podcast.
Well, now I get another one.
Oh, well, thank you, man.
Hey, thanks so much for watching my conversation with Sam Harris of X Ambassadors. Their new record is out now. It's called Townie. If you want to see more videos like this one, please subscribe to our channel. We post new conversations every week. And of course, we are a podcast. You can find The Great Creators wherever you listen to podcasts, Apple, Spotify, wherever. I'm Guy Raz, and you've been watching The Great Creators from Built It Productions. Thanks so much, and we'll be back next week with another show.